Thank you for joining us tonight. This is Wednesday Night Sessions. I am, as usual, your host, Mitch Nobis. We're coming to you theoretically from Farmington, Michigan, but of course the internet is everywhere. And as I always like to stupidly say, this will live as long as we're all out here. When YouTube exists, this show will exist. So you can watch it when you're watching it. We're recording it at night. The kids are in bed finally. Kind of a weird day in Metro Detroit, but life goes on. And the good thing is that I get to end my day talking with one of my favorite poets. Joining us tonight is DeMisty Bellinger. I saw that face. Seriously, I loved your book. I actually have it right here. I don't always do this, but I haven't put away my pile of books I've read recently. So here's DeMisty's book, Peculiar, let me get my finger out of the way, Peculiar Heritage by DeMisty Bellinger. Like always, I'm going to toss it over to her to give us a reading, and then we'll do a couple of short questions afterwards. All right, so DeMisty, thanks for joining us, and take it away.
Okay, thanks for having me, Mitch. As Mitch said, I'm a poet. I am also a fiction writer and editor, and every once in a while I write essays, but I am going to only read books from Peculiar Heritage. I have an earlier chapbook, which is Rubbing Elbows, which is here. But okay, so I'll read a few poems from this. This book is separated in 4 sections, and the first section is it goes through America, and the first section is in American slavery, and we move out of that. So I'm going to read a poem from a short cycle in the book about a woman who is escaping slavery, and she uses the moon quarters to track her travels. And the first one is called First Quarter. I'll read tonight. The moon tonight, 2 sides of one. I stare at the white side and let my eyes blur in tears until it grows fatter than it is. The pale pools over between the stars. I close my eyes and see a full moon, round as forgiveness. I cringe at benevolence towards those I've quit, enough so to make me open my eyes. On the other side, there is an absence of whiteness. The shadowed half of the moon extends silently across the sky, offering a muted possibility of not even forgetting. I lift it up into that darkness, and unflinching, I go where I am welcome to entertain the freedom to hate. I'm gonna read another poem from that short cycle, and this is the first poem I wrote in a cycle, and I didn't know it was going to be a group of poems when I wrote this, and this is called Waxing Gibbous. When the moon was too bright, we stayed in a little shed on someone's farm. There was one window and it was broken. The glass was almost softened and the edges where space was made. The glass that had undoubtedly fallen whenever it was cracked had been swept up. It was easy to imagine little sharp shards, sheets of brokenness shattered further by work shoes, glass ground into shimmery bits, glass catching moonlight like crystals and expense, like sand again. I brushed the toe of my boot against the floor, listened to the dirt slide like scouring soap against wood. I peek out the window and see the moon. Its light as white as dried cow dung, its shape wobbling to fullness. And I imagine days I'll spend here in this little shed. I am going to read June 19, 1865, and that's the last poem in this section. I'm no longer in that cycle, but still kind of in, well, this is Civil War era. June 19, 1865. Emancipation has too many syllables, and I don't have the words for syllables yet. I haven't the experience to understand what it could possibly mean and would be for me. Major General has too many titles, and none of them are master. He says free, and some of us laugh. I step gingerly forward, and nothing. For 2 years, Major General Gringer says, we've been free. And I take another step forward, and I hear nothing. I walk on, and I don't even hear a dog. I'm still walking. I am going to switch gears a little bit and go forward in a book. And this is a section that in my own mind, I call the post-capitalism section. This has to do with money, and capitalism. And this poem is called Windsor Knot, and this references to um, The Great Gatsby in here. So try to get the page 48. Nope. Sorry. Wow. Okay. I'm sorry. Remember the scene in Gatsby? Daisy selling shirts through the room space. I felt stuffy reading that novel when placed in Gatsby's Long Island mansion. Imagine instead waters outside, calm ripples, ties denoting masculinity, colors and patterns denoting what is man-made, rigidity of Western men, dampened, wetted, doused. Imagine instead a baptism in money, capitalism mistaken for love, economy of care, a wealth of undrinkable water, a sea of tightened ties. This next poem is called Sewing Season, and I wrote this in a workshop with Marge Piercy a couple of years ago. Sewing Season. My mother's fingers thrip, thrip, thrip through my coarse hair, 1/2/3, 1/2/3, thousands of ring circlets circling each other, thrip, 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 thousands of times, braiding histories of the women before her into my hair. My mother parts furrows onto the scalp beneath a mound of my woolly hair, scratching scree, she scree, charting rows of roads crossed by the women before her into my hair. My mother's fingers recall lineage of designs, cross continents, cross ideas, crossing cornrows, thrip, 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 plaiting Africa into my hair. And next, I'm going to read kind of a homage that I wrote to poets and poems I enjoyed, and this is called Morning Pledge. If at morning assembly we read a poem vetted by learned aficionados, instead of pledging our lives to a symbol, then we could delve into symbolism. How can we feel martial while contemplating burying children at home, wide hips, and supermarkets? Or maybe this is the stuff that makes us rise to war to protect the sanctity of running Mexicans and tender buttons. Here, take your hand from your heart and kneel as in prayer. Read with me about dried out reasons and deferred dreams. And I'll read two more. I'm going to read Pussy Willow. And I wrote this for the book originally, an anthology. It's called Nasty Women Poets. And I'll just read it. Pussy Willow. This common shrubbery's male form has a woolly catkin. A catkin is the flowering spike, typically downy, pendulous. You prefer fuzzy to woolly, but sure, woolly. Catkin roots are Dutch. It means something like kitten. Woolly or fuzzy, downy, pendulous kitten. You know this plant. You see silk flowers or dried flowers or just the male form of this plant in a tall vase, and the plant is erect and pointing ever upward. You take your index finger and a thumb finger of your left hand and absently stroke one of the little white woolly bulbs when talking to someone about anything else but catkin and fuzzy or woolly or kittens, and you close your eyes briefly, shudder slightly, feeling a little mischievous as the hairs of the plant tickle the pads of your fingers, and you're still talking about politics or anything else, and you grab this maleness of the shrubbery and feel some level of control. And the last poem I will read is Note to Self. And this poem is just about taking care of yourself and doing the things that you want to do, like writing instead of constantly going to meetings. Note to self. If you fill another slot, then you will be forced to stuff yourself. You will wrap yourself in others. If the miller's daughter could have said no, admitted her inability to spin straw into gold, if you spun the wool you have into the sweater you want, knit and purl one loop with another wanted loop, then imagine the gold you have. Thank you so much. I'm gonna stop reading there.
Thank you so much, DeMisty. That was fantastic. And you hit some of my favorites from the book too, which is great. It's like going to see the band and like they play some of your favorite songs, you know. But yeah.
Wow, what a compliment. Thank
So
you.
that was cool. I for regular viewers, you probably notice I often invite writers that I have discovered or found on Twitter. I always end up bringing up Twitter. It feels like, um, but I feel like you and I have talked about music a few times on Twitter recently, even, and so there's a little glimpse into how my brain works. I'm sitting here like, you know, I feel like I'm in the crowd, like she read the one about hair, yeah. So legit, I mean, that's just how my brain works. I don't know. We've also talked about Tom Waits a lot. I don't have any Tom Waits questions for you. I should have written a Tom Waits question for this interview. Oh, rats. All right, you're going to get a bonus round question then. We're going to oh, let's see if I can make it feel seamless. I said it out loud, so now you're all looking for it. We'll see if I can figure out a way to squeak in Tom Waits. I mean, should we not be squeaking Tom Waits into like every conversation?
Everything. And I should have a year of Tom Waits and just only have references to him.
Right, the man's a grizzled national treasure.
Yes, yes.
Okay, anyway, so but before we get to the goofy question, so I do always like to ask a craft question, and I'm really I'm thrilled you brought up the structure of the book because that was one thing. Like I'd read individual poems of yours before and loved them, and then when I got peculiar heritage, the kind of the chunking really stood out. The way that the first section is kind of its own what you called it a cycle, you know, and then like the sections. Really, let me just kind of hit pause and phrase it as a question. How did you go about structuring peculiar heritage and the different sections of the book?
Okay. When I first started putting poems together, and when I realized I had enough poems for a book and that I wanted to make a book, um, it was ordered much differently. And I think I tried to do it chronologically. I can't remember, but it was in 5 sections then. And the book was originally called 5 Ways to Escape. And I was looking at escape from slavery, but also escape from capitalism, escape from oppression, from patriarchy. And then the final part was just going to be escapism, like having fun or relaxing at the end of the day. And I don't think it was working in those 5 sections. I think that was too rigid. So I laid the book all out on tables, printed it and moved it around and decided this works better in 4. And I should take my strongest poem and call it that instead. And yeah, so with that, with the publisher too, after putting it in my order, the publisher made very small tweaks of where poems should go and asked me to add or drop like 1 or 2 poems. Um, but it was a process. It didn't happen organically. I had to think through it and think what was good to come first. And
Yeah, and it's that's one of my favorite things about the writers on Twitter, the poets on Twitter, is that they often show that moment, right, where you put all the poems out on the table or on the floor, or the bed. I mean, different people. I love those photos every time I see one. Like, here's the whole thing, trying to figure out the right sequencing, the right order. And yeah, I'm glad to hear that your editor at the press kind of helped with that too, because I always kind of I have my own manuscript that I'm a little the greedy part of me asking this question is my own manuscript continues to flounder out there. It gets really nice remarks, like these super kind rejections that are ultimately still rejections.
right.
That's one thing I always wonder about is does the sequencing work? You know, because I've gone back to the wood shop a couple of times and reworked it. So I'm glad to hear that your editor
Yeah.
still viewed it as a work in progress, and you know, like it's still malleable and kind of picking some out and moving them around, because I that seems to me like that's how the process should work.
Yeah. I was very lucky to get picking up or get picked up by Mason Jar Press. Um, they love the work that they do, and it's no, I don't think that there's a lot of money in Mason Jar. Like I think they all have day jobs,
Mm.
but it was very clear immediately how much they care about their writers and the work they were publishing, and they were hands on, but um they were receptive to my ideas and my opinions, and they never forced anything. I mean, it was a lovely experience working with Mason Jar. Probably one of the best publishing experiences I've had.
It's fantastic. And everybody I've interacted with who is with Mason Jar said the same thing. So,
Yeah.
kudos to them. Um, all right. So, normally, I shouldn't say normally, often my second question for folks is kind of goofy, but I did want to squeeze. So we'll here, we'll get Tom Waits back in here for the goofy question. So you get kind of a 1B question then. How we'll say this is still a writing question. You're an editor for Porcupine Literary, which is a literary magazine for teachers for writing about teaching, which I think is fantastic as a career educator. And writer. Like I was immediately drawn to Porcupine when it launched a few years ago. And I love like literally everything there. It's one of my favorite destinations on the internet. Clunky segue. So I said at the top of the show that it was kind of a weird day in Metro Detroit. We're recording this the day after we had a school shooting 35 miles north of where I'm sitting right now.
Oh
Had some really weird conversations with our own kids last night, prepping them, for going back to school, yada, yada, yada. Students often get, every generation does this in Socrates, right? They get these horrible reputations. Like kids these days are lazy. Oh, they invented the pencil. Now they're going to be dumb. We spend so much time slandering the next generation. And I find that when you actually talk shop with teachers, that doesn't happen that often. It's more of a general public thing. So we got two teachers in a Zoom chat here. DeMisty, tell me what's good about teaching. Like, tell me a good story about your students. Tell our viewers a good story about students.
Students, if they're listening and they're receptive, they will do things that will blow your mind and blow their own minds. And that sounds so corny, but I have an example. And first year writing, which is not a creative writing class, you're writing papers and stuff. But my last assignment is a fun one, and assignment that they don't know and trying to bring their grades up. So no matter what, they're going to get an A or B in this last assignment, and this creative ways of making arguments. So we do things like game making, like if you're doing social criticism in a game, and we'll look at that, or posters or comic books. And my first one is poetry because that's fun, and students always groan because these are not English majors, they're not creative writing students, they're comp sci students, or they're media students or nurses. And one student is like, I just hate poetry, I don't want to rhyme. And I was like, you don't have to rhyme. And we looked at some political poems from the beginning to to lately. We looked at, for instance, Jericho Brown. His name is Poem Tradition. And we looked at one by Somar. I'm so horrible with names. But we also looked at like the Great Colossus. And we looked at some Walt Whitman, so political poems. And the student who was just really resistant to poetry and writing poems wrote this great poem about Black hair. And then she read it to the class and she was so proud of it. She's like, I'm going to revise it. What do I do with it? And so I'm like, you have to put it in a student literary magazine.
Yes, yes.
So that was a moment when a student was receptive, listened, and challenged herself. And that's the highlights, I think, one of the highlights of my semester.
Yeah, that's
been a hard semester.
It has.
Yeah.
It's I was trying to keep in mind, like, it's very tempting for me to just talk shop with DeMisty right now, but there are people watching. I try to remember, I have to remind myself of that often. And I always struggle. Like, I wish there were a way to more easily communicate to the general public what teaching is like. Like just a moment ago, I asked you, like, tell us a good story. Like in that moment, your brain has to rifle through
a lot of good stories.
Thousands of moments. Like define a moment in a classroom. Like one class has thousands of significant moments and you don't even notice them. Like that's why being a rookie teacher is so punishingly difficult because you're still taking it all in. And a veteran teacher, like you're making so many snap decisions per second in some cases. It's just a wildly complex job, and it doesn't get represented that way in the general public. And I wish there were a way to help people understand just
and
how many different things a
this
teacher.
time during COVID and
Yes.
politics are just, it's really difficult. I have a lot of immigrant students, and I have a lot of first gen students, and a lot of my students are working class. And I think the general public, to speak of the general public, look at college students or colleges as bastions of wealth or money or wasting of money. But our school is a school where people move up the social ladder. Hopefully you can get a better job if you have a degree. So a lot of students are not only first generation in the country, but first generation to go to college.
Mm-hmm.
And I love working with that population because I was that student. Not, oh, my family's been in America for a while, but I was first to go to college, and I grew up in poverty. So, and of course it got better throughout the years. My parents are very hardworking, but I identify with that crowd. I'm going to talk too much about teaching too. I'll stop.
It's hard for us not to, right? It's I feel bad every now and then at the bigger family Thanksgiving. I come from a farming background, and so our table is basically dairy farmers and teachers, and it's like a challenge of like who's going to talk more shop. And I feel bad sometimes. My brother would get like, he'd be the only person at the table surrounded by teachers, and he just has to listen to it because teachers can't stop talking. Like it's just there's so much to talk about. All right, so here's how I'm going to do it. So if Tom Waits enrolled in your class, right? What's the essay you would hope he would turn in? What's it about?
It has to be how his wife has informed his work. Because if you look at his early work before they got together, I just love the story. I forget what it was, but it was just like she did something really unconventional, and that's what attracted him to her, or her to him. But before that, he was doing standard type stuff and lounge singer type songs. They weren't bad, but they're not what you think of when you think about Tom Waits. Now he's more of a storyteller and a poet, I think, in his work. And a little bit he became after her. His wife's name Kathleen. I have a horrible memory.
I want to say Kathleen Brennan.
Okay, yeah. His work, not only the content, the stories changed, but the sound of the music has changed too. He started using more funky sounds and instrumentation, and really dependent on rhythm a lot. I'm gonna listen to Tom Waits after this.
It's so hard not to. I still remember Mule Variations, maybe whatever album Big in Japan is on.
Oh yeah.
An interview where he was talking about that song, and he had recorded an earlier song. It was on one of those compilations. That's what it was. It was like a fundraiser, like this is the problem with going to college in the 90s. It's so long ago, I don't remember now. In the early 90s, we had all those compilation CDs. Or always a fundraiser for some kind of
or a tribute CD.
Yeah, exactly. And he had a song on one of those. And in the interview, he talked about how they built the baseline sound, like the rhythm section was built around a broken box springs, like on a bed.
Really?
Like they had found a box springs. It's like, it's making some cool wiki sound. And that was like the groove they built the song around was like springs. Like, how cool is that?
I gotta find that. Okay.
It's probably, you know what? I mean, I'm old. Like I used to read on paper, it's probably in that free magazine that Tower Records used to put out, like just some random interview somewhere. And I'm like, remember when you're like, 22, like everything latches into your brain. If it's a cool idea, like it's in there. So here I am, pushing 30 years later, and like I still remember that because it was like, wait, you can make music out of anything. It's at that moment when you realize like it's not just what society sold to me. There's more to it than that.
Right.
That's a great way to bring it back to Tom Waits and education in general. Right? Like that's that's what we're trying to do as teachers, is help people see
Yeah,
it. There's more than one way to do it. And that's what a
right.
brilliant artist like Tom Waits or DeMisty Bellinger can do with their work, is to get us to see things in other ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
I did it. I brought it back around. That's that's the highlight of my semester right there. Oh, all right. We should. I don't want to keep you for too long. So, DeMisty, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Oh, thank you. This was a lot of fun.
Awesome. I'm glad. That makes me happy to hear that. We record these things late, and I'm always worried like I'm chewing up people's free hour before they pass out at night. Like, I'm
Oh,
glad
no, I
that
don't go to bed until a few hours.
well, I mean, even when I go to bed, I don't sleep anymore. So, it's COVID parenting, you name it.
Yeah.
All right, regular viewers, it's been good to see you. New viewers, come back anytime. Our shows debut on Wednesdays at 7, thus the name Wednesday Night Sessions, but they are, again, in perpetuity on YouTube. Check them out anytime. I hear they're the perfect length to listen to while you're eating your lunch. So there's that. I've been told that by more than one person, for what that's worth. All right, DeMisty, thanks again. Viewers, thanks again. We'll see you next time.